Senator David Pryor are also parties in the suit. On the other side of the case is a national organization, U.S. Term Limits.
Paul Jacob is Executive Director of U.S. Term Limits. What's the issue in the case of U.S. Term Limits v. Thornton?
It's really the issue of federalism and where the power of the federal government ends and where the power of the states and of the people begin. We believe that states have a right to control the election process, to control their delegation to Congress, and in fact even a right to add additional qualifications as long as they're in keeping with the First and 14th Amendment and the rest of the Constitution. Arkansas, which is where the case U.S. Term Limits versus Thornton comes from, passed a ballot access term limit on their congressional delegation in 1992, limiting them to 3 terms in the House, 2 terms in the Senate, and after that point, they are not allowed to have their name on the ballot. If they win a write-in campaign, as has happened, Dale Alford in 1958 won a seat in Congress from Arkansas as a write-in candidate. So it is possible to do that, but it certainly evens the playing field and makes it to where the power of the incumbent is not so great, and that's really the goal of this movement. Open up the political process to new people and new ideas, and make it to where no one can really monopolize a seat of political power. Arkansas is not alone. There are 21 other states that have passed congressional term limits, most of them the same terms, 3 in the House, 2 in the Senate.
Take us back in this particular case, how it did start in Arkansas and how it's wound its way through the lower courts to get to where it is.
Well, this initiative was sued before it ever made it to the ballot in an attempt to block a vote on it. They failed, and it was probably the most contested initiative of any state in the country. Per capita, more money was spent on advertising pro and con on the initiative than in any other state. And in 1992, when Bill Clinton was running for president, the favorite son from Arkansas, he received 58% of the vote in his home state, which is also my home state, and the initiative received 60% of the vote. So it was a major victory. Arkansas is primarily a one-party state. The Democratic Party has controlled the state for really since the Civil War, and they fought it very much. Other entrenched political interests in the state fought it. The League of Women Voters and the Farm Bureau sued to try to block a vote. When it won, they sued within weeks to overturn the vote. It went to a district court, state court, but a lower level state court, and was thrown out on a technicality. And not to go into all the fine points of it, it was a fairly outrageous decision and created a real uproar in Arkansas about the kind of decision that would throw out this initiative on a very flimsy technicality. It then went to the state Supreme Court immediately from the lower court, and of the 7 justices, 4 of the justices recused themselves. So you had 4 new justices come out of the case, and the reason they recused themselves is that they had connections to other politicians in the state that they felt they couldn't really be unbiased. And in fact, there was at least one justice who was asked to recuse and refused to do so. The case then was argued before the state Supreme Court, and the court came down in a very split way. There were 2 dissenting opinions that argued that this case was constitutional, that term limits, one of the judges argued that term limits was a qualification, but that qualifications were allowed to the states, that nothing in the Constitution prohibited a state from adding additional qualifications, something that we certainly agree with. The other justice said it's not a qualification, it's simply a ballot access regulation, which again is our position, and that the states clearly have that right. The majority of the court ruled against term limits, but for a number of different reasons. Some because they felt like you couldn't add additional qualifications. Others argued that question was fuzzy, that there wasn't a clear answer, but that there ought to be uniform rules for getting on the ballot for Congress in each state, and therefore under the uniformity argument that they ought to overturn the initiative. And that is what they did. We, along with Arkansans for Governmental Reform, which was the group that brought term limits to the ballot, got it passed, and was active along with U.S. term limits in defending it, we got together and what Pete Williams with NBC News referred to as the Polaroid cert petition, 3 days after their decision to deny a rehearing of the case in front of the Arkansas Supreme Court. U.S. term limits and Arkansans for Governmental Reform with John Kester, our attorney from Williams and Connolly, filed a cert petition with the U.S. Supreme Court. There is a direct appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was granted on June 20th of this year. And since then, we've been working very hard to put together our briefs, respond to the opponents' briefs. There are a number of amicus briefs in this case. I believe there are 15 on our side, and somewhere 5, 6, or 7 on the other side, from various interest groups, members of Congress, legal foundations, and so on, arguing the merits or demerits of the term limit case and whether states have a right to impose ballot access restrictions, ballot access term limits on members of Congress.
This case is U.S. Term Limits v. Thornton. What is U.S. Term Limits?
Well, we're U.S. Term Limits. We're a nonprofit group, an advocacy organization. We're not partisan. We're not Republican, Democrat, Independent, or anything else. We're composed of over 70,000 members around the country who believe in term limits and who come from all political philosophies, all kinds of various demographic groups. We have really been committed to working with activists at the state and the local level to get term limits on the ballot and allow voters a chance to decide this issue. We've been very successful with that. 22 states now have laws on the books. In every case except for Utah, where the state legislature passed it, it was passed through citizen initiative. But not only have the states passed it, cities have passed it. New York City, Los Angeles, Kansas City, Houston, Cincinnati, San Francisco, Dallas, the list goes on and on and on. 270 cities and counties have passed term limits as well.
How are you funded?
We have our 70,000 members who are contributing members, donate $15 or more per year to receive our newsletter, No Uncertain Terms. We also have a National Finance Committee of people who've given $1,000 or more, and we have 78 members of that who've made really significant contributions to help us fund petition drives in various states, lobbying campaigns, advertising campaigns for passage of initiatives, and also voter education efforts, which really have happened in 1994 for the first time, where we've gone into various races where term limits is an issue and told people this is where the candidates stand on term limits. If they're good on term limits, we want you to know that. If they haven't yet been willing to sign our voters' contract, which calls for 3 terms in the House, 2 in the Senate, please call them and tell them as a constituent, as a voter, you want them to support term limits.
This is V. Thornton. Who's Thornton?
Ray Thornton is the congressman from the 2nd District of Arkansas. That's the district that encompasses Little Rock and the surrounding counties. And he has really been, he's named along with Bobby Hill, who is the president of the League of Women Voters in Arkansas, other members of the congressional delegation who have argued against term limits. But Congressman Thornton has been the most active litigant on the other side in terms of trying to overturn this, and that's why he was named first.
Who are the other members named specifically?
Senator Bumpers, Dale Bumpers, Senator Pryor, David Pryor, and then Blanche Lambert, who's from the 1st District, is also named. 2 of the congressmen have been very supportive of term limits, Tim Hutchinson and Jay Dickey, who are both members of Congress from Arkansas and have actually filed an amicus brief in favor of the constitutionality of the initiative in Arkansas.
Is that breakdown in the delegation along party lines?
It is along party lines in Arkansas, although it's interesting, the delegation is that way, but Arkansas, you don't register by party, but the state is so overwhelmingly Democratic that for anyone to suggest that somehow Republicans favor it but Democrats don't, you'd never win 60-40 in Arkansas unless you had an awful lot of Democratic votes.
When this is argued before the Supreme Court, what will the key issues being made by your side?
I think the key issues are twofold. One, the text of the Constitution specifically gives states the power to control the election process. It gives states the power to determine the time, manner, and place of elections. And this is a manner regulation. It regulates the manner of elections. States have for a long time done that. And it's just something that we believe Congress does have a role in that. Congress could always decide, let's overturn, let's change, let's alter, or let's extend term limits to other states under Article 1, Section 4. What Congress has decided, however, is not to use their power under the Constitution, but instead to try to move this out of Congress and into the courts. And our view is the reason they want to move it into the courts is to move it away from the American people who are overwhelmingly in favor of it. So that will be one of the key arguments. Another argument is simply that not only does the text of the Constitution give this power to the states, but nothing in the Constitution says that you can't add additional qualifications if the court indeed thought this was a qualification. And the 10th Amendment clearly further confirms that if it's not a power granted to the federal government, that it is reserved to the states and to the people. Nothing in the arguments made by the other side can contradict the fact that the states have this power, and nothing in the Constitution prohibits it.
You mentioned other groups filing briefs. Who's filed on your side and who on the other?
Well, there have been a number of attorney generals. 17 state attorney generals have filed amicus briefs on our side. Governor John Engler from Michigan was one of the people who filed a brief on our side. The Washington Legal Foundation, the Southeastern Legal Foundation, numerous term limit groups, state groups around the country have joined as part of these amicus briefs. So it's really come from a real cross-section of the legal community, political activists, and some politicians or elected officials who really feel that this is an important case. And primarily that it's an important case to define where states' rights really begin. If the states have no control over their own delegation to Congress, that would seem to be a really draconian view of the role that the states and the people respectively have. And I think that's why you see a lot of people talking about this in terms of federalism. The Clinton administration, which we abhor, they're using our tax dollars and our Justice Department. It's not Mr. Clinton's, it's the American people's. They're using the Justice Department to try to overturn this law, saying that basically this would be chaotic and that it would destroy the federal system. It seems to me not to be chaotic or to be destructive of the federal system for the people of the state of Arkansas to control their delegation to Congress.
Again, kind of a process question. What does it mean for you getting ready that your case is consolidated with the Bryant case, I believe?
Well, it means that we work together with Winston Bryant, who is the Attorney General from Arkansas, because both John Kester, our attorney, and Winston Bryant will be arguing this case before the Supreme Court.
Let me close by asking you the ramifications of this, depending on how it's decided.
Well, I'm very optimistic about our chances in court and about this case in general for two reasons. One, I think we're going to win. I don't want to sound like Joe Namath that we automatically guaranteed are going to win. I just think that the law's on our side, the text of the Constitution, the intent of the framers is on our side, and I think that the legal arguments we've made are very sound, so I think we'll win. But I guess the other important thing is whether federalism prevails and the state's power to impose term limits is upheld by the court, or the court says, no, it requires a constitutional amendment. They're not going to determine whether we get term limits or not. I think we're going to get term limits. That's what the people want, and that's what this system, our system of government, is going to enact. The question that the court's going to decide is really how. Will the court say the states have this right to impose term limits, and therefore we can go state by state, either through all 50 states or until the Congress gets the message and passes a constitutional amendment or federal legislation? Or will the court say, no, it requires a constitutional amendment, in which case I think you're going to see the kind of use of the term limit issue in candidate races around the country, and continued pressure, a real battle, a pitched battle between the American people and their Congress, saying, we demand that you pass limits. Certainly Congress is resistant to that. Many of them want to stay here term after term after term. They want to make a career out of it. The American people, and it's not a slim majority, it's 80%, according to the latest Wall Street Journal, NBC News poll, the Times Mirror poll, 80% of the American people want term limits. And so the court is simply going to tell us whether we can continue the state-by-state process, whether that is constitutionally sound, or whether we have to get a constitutional amendment. If we do have to get a constitutional amendment, we're going to do so.
Paul Jacob is Executive Director of U.S. Term Limits. Thanks.
Thank you.
America and the Courts continues its look at this case, interviewing Carter Phillips, the attorney for